Nothing is more central to the prospects of human survival than the need for a fundamental rethink of the economics of energy. And we struggle to engage with that properly, largely because, as things stand, all the energy policy is dominated by the interests of the big energy producers, all of which are invariably high carbon emitters, and whose profits are propped up by public subsidies, unaffordable prices for consumers, and unacceptable policies in relation to immediate carbon reductions. So breaking the grip of the carbon cartel is central to a completely different set of economics and a completely different approach to how we live, and not just about energy security and sustainability, but also energy democracy. We forget in Britain that it was only really in the middle of the last century that we moved to a system where energy was dominated by large national or transnational interests. Up until that time, from 1817 in Manchester through to 1950, the energy systems were almost all configured around localities. And so towns and cities around the UK all had their own local energy companies financed by municipal bonds in which people put their 5 shillings, £5, £50 or £500 if you were really rich into the development of local energy systems, which kept the lights on and added to security and created employment, but they also created income for the localities, and from which the bulk of Britain's libraries, parks, gardens, municipal resources were actually paid for out of the proceeds generated by the locality energy companies. And we need to remember that, because then we did it with dirty energy. Now, quite clearly, not the stuff that we would need to be working on. But we can do exactly the same today with clean energy systems and also make them more local, democratic, and accountable. And when you consider that 50% of the energy currently being generated is lost at the power station, you immediately start to configure this around localities. And that's where you're going to deliver the 10% annual carbon reductions that come from a shift into a more sustainable economics. And that's where we're going to have to be trying to pinch examples from other countries that already have local energy networks, smart grids, and where the energy economics of storing, saving, and sharing is already much further advanced than in the UK, largely because the UK energy systems are still substantially in the grip of the big energy generators or distributors. And that grip actually determines their ability to deliver uninterrupted profit streams and dividend streams for their shareholders, if not clean and affordable renewable energy for the public that they serve. So that's the shift that we need to make. And it's a mindset shift as much as anything. When I was a kid, we used telephone boxes. We didn't have mobile phones. Now, most people have mobile phones in their pockets and they work from laptops or iPads or whatever. And so that sense of more mobile information systems actually now has to be applied to energy systems too. We don't need to be thinking, in fact, it is catastrophic for us to be thinking that what we need are more national power stations, high voltage distribution grids. It's like the motor industry saying the problem of congestion is that we just need more roads, more motorways. Actually, we need a fundamental rethink. So what would that look like? Well, in Hamburg, there's a really fantastic example of Smartest Green, where all of their buildings now that are going up have high levels of energy efficiency built into them. They have passive house construction standards, PV modules on their roofs and balustrades, and in some cases they even have the solar shades and what are called PCMs, phase change materials, on the walls and interiors, such that they are able to absorb heat during the day and emit it during the night. And they also have the seasonality use of foliage to provide shade in summer and not in winter. So it is a redefining of our relationship to living with the seasonality of what nature offers us in terms of resources to maintain and deliver heating systems that we need and are renewable, and avoid the ones, get out of the ones that are non-renewable and currently planet destroying. So for the UK, it isn't rocket science about how, it's just that we've had a series of governments in place that have turned their backs on the scale of what needs doing simply and quickly, which is mainly in terms of how you avoid the waste of energy that is associated with particularly with the older buildings that we have inherited, and which most of us will live our lives within the existing building stock that the UK has. The critical thing is to have national energy policies where losing less energy in waste is the critical starting point, rather than how we generate more. And if we were to do that, the other great thing is that the economic advantages in terms of skill training in the UK and then the consequential spending of wages in localized economies create a more localized series of merry-go-rounds, which in fact are the money-go-rounds that keep local economies going well. It certainly can benefit as well with national leadership, which we have a real paucity of in the UK at the moment. But some of the examples here, France is a great example, where all car parks now with 80 or more places will have to have solar roofs. Then derelict lots and empty land and railway sidings are required to incorporate solar generation as well. They plan to add 11 gigawatts of electricity to their grid, which is the equivalent of 10 nuclear reactors, and all of which can be delivered within a matter of years rather than decades, and all of which will be renewable and sustainable in ways that none of the existing energy systems are. And this is just the start of a much wider revolution that is already underway, and which the UK has to have something of a humility of its approach to recognizing what we ought to try to copy from others. The example that I always cite is Nottingham's twin city of Karlsruhe, where they already have over 800 electricity distributors, 2 million generators, over 700 energy cooperatives, and where 1 in 6 of the companies create their own energy already. And this is fantastic, because not only is it just about energy security, it is also about energy democracy. When I've taken groups of politicians to look at the systems in Germany, what is really there in your face is a recognition that if you empower households and communities to be the generators of their own energy, climate thinking suddenly becomes central to how they view the contributions that they can make. And it's the democracy as well as the sustainability element that are pivotal to the rate at which those sort of changes can be developed. We also have to move into the development of green grids and storage. Britain talks about this, but we are way behind the pack in terms of where and how the investment in energy storage and generation, and not only are other countries much further ahead of us, that they're also, in the context of Norway, already experimenting with second life battery storage and the reuse of current storage facilities. So this too is a vast area, not just a battery development for transport, but battery development and use and reuse for more localized energy storage and sharing at a street level, or even within a single household, where you generate from your roof and use it to be stored for use in the evenings or to charge vehicles. All of that is much more an integrated approach to energy generation and storage that we've really got to try and catch up on. Again, there are loads of fantastic examples from elsewhere. In this Ackermann estate in southern Germany, just outside Munich, they built a reservoir. This particular photograph is taken from the top of a hill adjacent to the estate, but underneath the hill, they built a huge reservoir, and all of the buildings on the estate have solar thermal roof panels. It feeds the reservoir, and they provide 50% of the estate's heating. And so automatically, you get this sense of harnessing nature and what nature has to offer in order to then connect it to in this case, the heating needs of people's homes and apartments. And it's that ability to develop an economic thinking that is about dancing with nature rather than stomping all over it, that is the key to much more of a fundamental shift away from free market economics and in favor of more sustainable, long-term and inclusive energy systems. Another really good example of this is in the town of Heerlen in the Netherlands. And what they've got is they discovered or realized that they had a series of disused coal mines in the vicinity of the town. And someone said, well, can we use it? And what they eventually concluded was that if they drilled down into the galleries, they're flooded and the water in there is really hot. So they have closed loop systems to pump that water up. They have heat exchangers at the surface, and that is then piped around, ducted around to provide heating for the whole of the town. And this is just a fantastic sense of something that the UK could capitalize on. As it stands, we have got 25,000 disused coal mines. 1 in 4 of the population apparently live within ductable supply distances of such resources. But are we developing it? No, are we? Hell, it's like in 2021, the UK installed just 50,000 individual heat pumps, but at the same time installed 1.7 million gas boilers. And there is no sense of an approach to integrated, localized heating systems that we're really going to need. Why? Because if you look at the interests of the big energy companies, it is much harder for them to control things that are localized and self-contained than in having things that are national at scale, but can be transnational in their ownership. And that's the mindset that we have to break away from. It's one of the things that many of the European towns, particularly in Denmark, where first of all, it's illegal to sell energy for a profit, but then the energy companies, the localized energy companies, have to provide both combined heat and power supplies. And the vast majority of the frameworks that deliver this are in the form of energy cooperatives that are owned by municipalities and or by collectivities of towns and cities. And all of this is doable. It's actually being done now pretty much everywhere, apart from in the UK, where entrenched interests in centralized ownership and distribution and the control of secure dividends for national or transnational investors takes precedence over more sustainable systems that will benefit local residents and the planet. If we want a starting point, my great sense of where we find inspiration, it goes back into Germany, in southern Germany, in a place called Schönau, where after the Chernobyl disaster, they decided that they really wanted to get out of nuclear energy, and actually wanted to get into renewable energy. And they set the template for a different approach to energy thinking, which has now delivered this huge diversity of local ownership and engagement across the whole of Germany. And this wasn't started by academics. It wasn't started by high-flying business people. It was started by a couple who, well, Ursula Schladek, who helped set this up, at the time was a primary school teacher. And she just wanted to get out of dangerous energy dependency and into renewable energy dependency. And they actually have helped to set up the EWS system, the cooperative there, which has become the model across pretty much the whole of Germany. And we could be doing exactly the same too. My argument is that if this can be driven by someone who is a primary school teacher, whose background in the energy sector was near zero at the start, then every one of us can actually bring that sort of vision of a different future and a skill acquisition program for ourselves and our communities into a game that transforms how we live more sustainably on the only planet that we've got.